NASA may have scrapped its plans to put women and people of color on the moon, but it has its sights set on a new milestone.
NASA just had its entire understanding of the moon turned upside down by data it threw away 50 years ago. A new analysis of declassified Apollo logs revealed a seismic event that simply should not exist. It wasn't an impact, it wasn't a standard quake, it was something else. This single event, which we'll call Event 77 Alpha, is the tip of an iceberg. The same logs revealed 22,000 other quakes NASA completely missed. The moon is ringing like a bell, and for decades we weren't listening. Now scientists are scrambling to figure out what it means. 22,000 new problems. So here's the deal. For as long as most of us have been alive, the moon has been seen as this quiet, peaceful, and, let's be honest, mostly dead piece of rock. We landed on it, we planted a flag, and we left. The last big update on its geology was from the Apollo missions, which ended in the 1970s. The astronauts left behind equipment including seismometers, which are basically quake detectors for the moon. For 50 years, the official count of these moonquakes was around 13,000. That seemed like a lot, but most were tiny, and the story was set. The moon is a cold, dead, silent world. Yeah, about that. That whole story? It was completely wrong. The crazy part is, the real data, the data that shatters this image, has been sitting around for half a century, basically ignored. This isn't a new discovery from a new mission, this is a bombshell found in our own attic. A seismologist at the University of Tokyo, Keisuke Onodera, decided to look at a part of the Apollo data that everyone else had written off as pure junk. Back in the day, the Apollo astronauts set up two different kinds of seismometers. The first kind was for long-period waves. Think of these as the big, slow, deep rumbles. This is where the original 13,000 quakes were found. It was slow, clean data, and scientists were happy with it. But the second kind was for short-period waves. These are the quick, sharp, high-frequency jolts. The snaps in the crust, not the rumbles from the core. And here's the catch. The short-period data was a complete and total mess. What most people don't realize is how extreme the moon's surface is. It's not like Earth. There's no atmosphere to average things out. In the 2-week-long lunar day, the surface can hit a scorching 260 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, in the 2-week-long night, it plummets to a bone-chilling negative 280 degrees Fahrenheit. This massive temperature swing, a change of over 500 degrees, made the equipment itself crackle. This thermal noise created a wall of static. On top of that, there were issues beaming the data back to Earth. The signal was noisy, it was full of interference, and it was just plain hard to read. So NASA scientists at the time did the logical thing. They focused on the clean data and basically gave up on the messy stuff. Until Keisuke Onodera. Onodera got his hands on the digital records of this junk data, and using modern powerful denoising techniques, think of it like a super advanced photo restoration, but for seismic signals, he started to clean it up. He spent months in painstaking detail, applying algorithms to filter out the static, the thermal cracks, and the transmission errors. He was hunting for the real signals buried underneath. And what he found is a bombshell. It's not that simple, though. He didn't just find a few new rumbles. He first identified 30,000 candidates for new moonquakes. Then, after carefully checking each one against the records, he confirmed 22,000 new real lunar quakes. 22,000. This doesn't just add to the old number, it triples the total number of known moonquakes, bringing the new grand total to 35,000. This single study just rewrote our entire understanding of how active the moon is. What most people don't realize is this changes everything. This proves the moon isn't dead. It's seismically and tectonically active today. Scientists had sorted moonquakes into a few neat boxes. You had deep quakes, happening about 400 miles down, caused by the Earth's gravity squeezing the moon like a stress ball. Then you had thermal quakes, which are just the surface crust cracking as it heats and cools every day. And finally, you had meteor impacts. But this new data shows something else. Onodera's new data, all those high-frequency jolts, are different. He stated that the readings hint that many more of these quakes are shallow, and shallow quakes are the ones to worry about. They happen in the upper crust, just a few dozen miles down. And just like on Earth, they can be much, much more powerful. This is like living by a volcano you thought was extinct and suddenly hearing it gurgle. The moon is groaning, cracking, and shifting. And for 50 years, we were only listening to the echo, not the roar. This whole discovery opens a floodgate of new questions. But the biggest one isn't just how active is the moon, it's what kind of activity is this? Because buried in those 22,000 new signals, there was one that stood out. A signal so powerful, so strange, and so unlike a normal quake that it has scientists completely baffled. But the story of how we even have this data is even crazier. How the moon's vitals were lost. So here's the deal. Why was this revolutionary, world-changing data just sitting around in a digital attic? This is where the story gets wild, and it turns one scientist into a legend. After the Apollo missions wrapped up in the early 1970s, NASA's focus shifted. They had the space shuttle to build, and budgets were tight. In 1977, NASA pulled the plug. They just turned off the lunar seismometers. They shut down the entire network of scientific stations known as ALSEP, or the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments Package. And get this, they officially decided to abandon the short-period data. It was messy, it was expensive to store, and they had bigger projects. They saved the clean, long-period data on which the original 13,000 quake count was based, but they were ready to let the rest just go. In fact, some of their original records were even lost. The moon's most detailed vital signs were about to be thrown in the trash. But one man, a geophysicist at the University of Texas in Austin named Yoshio Nakamura, refused to let it disappear. He was one of the original scientists on the project. He knew even back then that there was value in that noisy data. He had a hunch. He was convinced that there were thousands of quakes hidden in the static. He even told his colleagues, "We thought there must be many, many more, but we couldn't find them." So he did something incredible. In an act that now looks like pure genius, Nakamura saved a copy. He backed up the entire short-period data stream from all the stations for all those years. He didn't back it up to hard drives. This was the 70s. He saved it on 12,000 massive reel-to-reel tapes. 12,000 tapes. Think about that. Think of old-school movie projectors. 12,000 of those reels holding the moon's hidden heartbeat. He basically put the moon's secrets in a box, stored them, and saved them for a future that he knew would one day have the technology to read them. These tapes were later digitized, a massive undertaking in itself. But still, no one had the tools or the sheer patience to sift through the noise. They sat on servers, a digital ghost, until Keisuke Onodera came along and proved Nakamura right. What most people don't realize is what a miracle this Apollo equipment was. The astronauts didn't just plant a flag and leave, they set up these ALSEP stations. And the wow factor? They were nuclear-powered. They ran on radioisotope thermoelectric generators. These were mini nuclear reactors that ran for years after the astronauts left, beaming data back around the clock. The seismometers were so sensitive it's hard to even wrap your head around. They could pick up the astronauts' footsteps. They recorded the vibrations from the lunar landers taking off to go home. The scientists on Earth could even hear the little metal crackles as the landers heated up in the morning sun. And that's when they found the first weird thing about the moon. To test their equipment and understand the moon's insides, NASA's scientists ran a famous experiment. They took the used rocket stages and the lunar module ascent stages and purposefully crashed them into the moon. They knew the mass of the object and the speed so they could measure the impact. On Earth, when something that big hits the ground, the vibrations last for a few minutes, maybe 10 or 15, because Earth's interior is wet and mushy and it dampens the sound. When NASA crashed the first object into the moon, the entire moon rang like a bell. And that's not an exaggeration. The vibrations didn't last for minutes. They lasted for hours. On one test, the moon rang for over 4 hours from a single impact. This told them the moon's interior is totally different from Earth's. It's not wet and damp. It's dry, cold, and incredibly rigid. Vibrations don't just die, they travel on, bouncing around the entire sphere. This ringing is key. The 13,000 quakes they did find were these big, slow rumbles that made the whole moon ring. But the data Nakamura saved? That was the other stuff. The sharp, sudden cracks. The high-frequency jolts. The things that happen inside the crust. And that data, the data no one wanted, held the biggest secret of all. It was a signal that shouldn't exist. Not an impact, not a quake. Among the 22,000 new signals that Keisuke Onodera painstakingly uncovered, one stood out. This is it. This is the lunar seismic event that still can't be explained. It's the one that has scientists' heads spinning. For our purposes, let's call it Event 77 Alpha. When Onodera first isolated this signal from the decades-old static, it must have been a what-on-earth moment. Here's why. First, it was powerful. This wasn't a tiny thermal crack in the surface dust. This wasn't a small rumble from 400 miles down. This was a monster. On the Richter scale, which we use here on Earth, it was estimated to be in the range of a 5.5. That may not sound huge for Earth, where we get 9s, but for the Moon, it's a massive event. A shallow quake of that size would be easily felt by anyone on the surface. It would be strong enough to crack a lunar base wide open. It's a genuine game changer. Second, it was the signature of the quake. It was a shallow quake, meaning it happened in the crust, but it had a high-frequency jolt that was completely off the charts. This wasn't a slow rumble, it was a sudden, violent snap. This is the exact kind of data the old long-period sensors were designed to ignore. They would have missed the most important part of the event. It was only on Nakamura's noisy tapes, the ones no one wanted, that this terrifying signal was even visible. So here's the deal. The science team ran the checks. Could it be a meteor impact? Number. An impact has a very specific signature. It's a splat. The energy is all on the surface. This wasn't that. This was a snap. A sign of energy being released from within. A sign of rocks grinding against each other or breaking. Could it be a deep quake? Number. It was way too close to the surface, and the frequency was all wrong. Deep quakes are low and slow. This was high and fast. So it's a shallow quake, right? A slip strike fault? Well, yes, but it's not that simple though. The energy it released and the way it vibrated was not like the other shallow quakes they found. It seemed to ring at a high frequency that baffled the team. It was almost like a harmonic, a pure resonant tone buried in the noise. And then there's the location. This is where it gets really weird. The ALSEP network, the different stations spread across the moon, was good enough to get a rough location for the event. They could triangulate it, and it happened near a very, very strange part of the moon. It came from the edge of a mass concentration, or mascon. Mascons are one of the moon's biggest mysteries. They are huge, invisible areas of the moon where gravity is suddenly stronger. You can't see them. But if you're orbiting the moon, your spacecraft will literally dip in altitude, pulled down by this unseen mass. They are huge, unbelievably dense lumps of material, likely the cores of massive ancient asteroids that impacted the moon billions of years ago and are still buried just under the surface like a cannonball in soft mud. Event 77 Alpha seems to have come from the edge of one of these giant buried anomalies. It suggests there is massive, unexplained stress building up in the lunar crust right where these strange objects are buried. This one event has opened a Pandora's box of questions. What is causing this stress? Is the moon's crust cracking under the strain of these buried giants? Is it just a normal but very large tectonic event? Or is it something else? This is the safe explanation. A big, weird quake. But the signal is so strange, it has scientists scrambling for other, more exotic natural theories. One idea is a massive, sudden release of trapped gas. The moon's interior is thought to have pockets of gas like carbon monoxide trapped from its formation. What if this was a cold eruption? A high-pressure pocket of ancient gas finally bursting through the crust in a violent high-frequency snap. But even that doesn't fully explain the signal's weirdly clean harmonic. The data is real. The event happened, but we have no model for it. It's a true unknown. And this is where the wild theories begin. Why is the signal so clean? This is where things get really strange. When the official science ends, when the data just doesn't fit, speculation takes over. And for Event 77 Alpha, the speculation is wild. Let's look at the facts again. An unbelievably powerful 5.5 magnitude event. A high-frequency snap that's almost like a harmonic. And it comes from the edge of a mascon, a giant, dense, buried something. So here's the deal. What if it wasn't natural at all? This is what a lot of people are now wondering. For decades, there have been fringe theories about the moon. The biggest one? That the moon is artificial, or at the very least, hollow. Yeah, about that. It sounds crazy. But this theory was born from the Apollo data itself. Remember the ringing like a bell experiment? When NASA crashed those modules into the moon and it rang for hours? The scientists' explanation was that the rock is dry and rigid, but the hollow moon theorists had a different idea. They said, of course it rang like that. You're hitting a giant hollow hull. They believe the moon is an artificial construct, a giant ancient space station possibly put there by an advanced civilization. The rocky crust is just a covering, hiding a massive metallic structure underneath. And get this. What are the mascons? The official answer is buried asteroid cores. But the wild theory? They're the support struts, the anchor points, the massive, dense power plants or engines of this ancient, dormant battle station. Now look at Event 77 Alpha again through that lens. It's a 5.5 magnitude snap. It's high frequency. It has a clean harmonic resonance, and it comes from the edge of a mascon. What if it wasn't a quake at all? What if it was a machine? What if it was a massive ancient piece of technology, dormant for billions of years, suddenly activating or shifting? A high-frequency harmonic doesn't sound like rock. It sounds like a giant tuning fork. It sounds like metal under stress. It sounds like a giant capacitor discharging. Think about it. The ALSEP stations were nuclear-powered. They were pumping out energy and radiation on the lunar surface for years. What if that was enough to wake something up? This opens a whole new line of terrifying questions. Was Event 77 Alpha a one-time thing? Was it a piece of ancient machinery breaking? Or was it a warning, a signal? Not to us, but about us. And that's putting it lightly, because the signal isn't the only mystery. The new analysis found 22,000 new quakes. This proves the moon is tectonically active. But what if the hollow moon idea is partially right? What if the crust is cracking and shifting and because the structure underneath is moving? What most people don't realize is that some of these fringe ideas are getting harder to just laugh at. The data is real. The mystery quake is real. The mascons are real. The ringing like a bell phenomenon is real. Is it more likely that it's just weird, exotic geology we don't understand? Yes, that's the safe answer. But the wild answer is a lot more chilling, that the moon is not what we think it is, that it's a construct, and the quake we just found wasn't a natural event. It was a sign of something else, something shifting deep inside the unseen moon. The implications are staggering. It means we aren't just visiting a dead rock. We're poking a sleeping giant. And this giant might not be happy about it, but this mystery isn't just in the past. It's a direct, terrifying warning for the future. The shaking South Pole. Everyone is obsessed with the new Artemis program. It's the big headline. NASA is finally going back to the moon, and this time they say they're going to stay. We're not just talking about planting another flag and picking up some rocks. We're talking about building a permanent base, a lunar colony, a human outpost in space. They plan to have astronauts living and working up there full-time. It's the dream we've had since the 1960s, and they've already picked the neighborhood. The spot where this Artemis base camp will be built is the lunar South Pole. Why there? Why not on the nice flat plains where Armstrong and Aldrin landed? The answer is one word: water. The lunar South Pole has a unique geographic feature. It has craters like the famous Shackleton crater that are so deep and angled in such a way that their floors are in permanent shadow. We're talking about places that haven't seen a single ray of sunlight in literally billions of years. They are some of the coldest places in the entire solar system, and in those frigid, dark shadows, satellites have detected the signature of billions, maybe trillions, of pounds of water ice. Now, for you and me, here on Earth, ice is, well, it's just ice. You fill a tray with it. But on the moon, that ice is a gold mine. It is the single most valuable resource in existence. It's the reason to go, period. Think about it. First, you can melt it and drink it. Astronauts wouldn't have to rely on expensive water shipments from Earth. Second, you can use it to water plants. Fresh food on the moon. But here's the real prize, the one that gets NASA engineers excited. You can crack that water. You can take the H2O and use electricity from solar panels on the crater rim to split it into its parts, hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen is what you breathe, and hydrogen and oxygen, when you put them back together, are the most powerful, most efficient rocket fuel we know. All of a sudden, the moon isn't just a destination, it's a gas station. Instead of having to launch a massive, super heavy rocket from Earth to get to Mars, you can launch a lighter one. Stop at the moon, fill up the tank with moon-made fuel, and then go to Mars. It's a game changer. It saves billions of dollars and opens up the rest of the solar system. That ice is the single most valuable piece of off-world real estate. It's the only place on the moon that makes sense for a long-term base. Sounds perfect, right? A sci-fi dream come true. But here's the problem. Here's the catch, the big fine print that nobody's telling you about. New seismic data that was actually lost for decades and just rediscovered, is a massive screaming red flag. And when you combine that lost data with new high-resolution images from our newest spacecraft, the picture gets terrifying. What most people don't realize is that the moon is shrinking. Yeah, shrinking. It sounds crazy, but it's simple science. The moon, like the Earth, has a hot molten core, or at least it used to. Over the last few 100 million years, that core has been slowly cooling off. And just like anything that cools, from a freshly baked cake to a car engine, it contracts. It gets smaller. As the moon's hot metal interior shrinks, its brittle, cold outer crust has to adjust. The best analogy is a grape drying into a raisin. As the inside shrinks, the outer skin has to wrinkle and fold in on itself to fit. On the moon, these wrinkles are terrifying. They are fault lines. Scientists call them thrust faults or scarps. But let's be clear, they are cliffs. We're not talking about little cracks. We're talking about cliffs that are hundreds of feet high and run for miles and miles. They are places where one massive slab of the lunar crust has been violently pushed up and over another. And here's the crucial part. They are not old, dead features. They are active. The moon is shrinking right now. These faults are moving today. And guess where the most active, most dangerous, most concentrated network of these moving fault lines is? You guessed it, the lunar South Pole. The exact place where NASA wants to build its town. This isn't just a theory. We have the pictures. Recent images from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO, show fresh landslides. They show clear tracks where boulders, some the size of a car, have tumbled down the steep crater walls. The dust is fresh. The tracks are new. This isn't ancient history from a billion years ago. This is geologic activity that is happening right before our eyes. And it's happening right where NASA wants to land astronauts and build pressurized habitats. Now, connect this with the new seismic data. A scientist named Keisuke Onodera was digging through old Apollo-era data. We're talking magnetic tapes from the 70s. And he found 22,000 new moon quakes that had been missed. He found that shallow quakes, the ones that happen near the surface, are far more common, far more numerous than anyone knew. And what causes shallow quakes? Active faults. The wrinkles. All of a sudden, an old Apollo mystery starts to make a lot of sense. Back in 1977, the Apollo seismometers registered a monster signal. It was so strange, so powerful, that scientists at the time couldn't explain it. They labeled it Event 77 Alpha. It was a 5.5 on the Richter scale. For decades, it was a scientific curiosity. But now, Onodera's analysis shows that Event 77 Alpha was the exact signature of one of these scarp faults, one of these wrinkles, letting go violently. The mystery of Event 77 Alpha suddenly looks less like a scientific curiosity and a lot more like a direct warning. That event was a 5.5. Scientists now believe, based on the size of the scarps they see at the South Pole, that these faults could produce quakes as strong as 7.0. A 7.0, let that sink in. A 7.0 earthquake on Earth is a nightmare. It flattens cities. It's a massive disaster. On the moon, it's worse. Why? Because of the gravity. Here on Earth, our buildings are designed to flex, but they're also held firmly on the ground by gravity. On the moon, with only 1/6 of Earth's gravity, a 7.0 quake wouldn't just shake a base, it would launch it. Habitats, rovers, solar panels, and astronauts would be thrown into the air only to crash back down. And remember those landslides the LRO already spotted. A 7.0 quake wouldn't just cause a landslide, it would cause catastrophic collapse. The South Pole is full of craters. It's all steep slopes. A major quake would cause those crater walls to collapse. A lunar landslide, a river of rock and dust, could bury an entire habitat in seconds. No warning, no escape. So here's the deal. NASA is planning to send people to live in the most seismically active, dangerous, and unstable region on the entire moon. And they were planning this before they knew about the 22,000 new quakes, before they understood the monster signal of Event 77 Alpha. This changes the entire equation for the Artemis program. They are not landing on a dead, silent, desolate rock. They are landing in an active, violent seismic zone. Is the moon a dead rock, or is it a giant ancient machine? What do you think is buried under the surface? Let us know below, like and subscribe for more secrets.